Today, we will be discussing, showcasing different examples of how to bring different local voices into the global policy space. And we will be asking ourselves the question of what does meaningful and authentic amplification of local voices looks like. We will start first with the launch of the GCA report, for which I would like to first invite Dr. Shinas Musa, CEOs of CDKN, followed by Anju Sharma, LLA lead, and also working in the GCA report. Thanks so much.
Sorry, I just gave myself a shock there. Thank you, Sheila, for clapping for me. Sorry, no, we're just joking. So firstly, welcome to all of you. I know it's the last session of the day. It was quite a mission to get here. So firstly, welcome and thank you for being here. We launched yesterday the second edition of the Global Center on Adaptation Stories of Resilience, Lessons from Local Adaptation Practices. I'm from South North, one of the directors, as well as the CEO of the Climate and Development Knowledge Network, CDKN. As CDKN, we are really honored to have worked alongside the GCA to produce this report, and it was in collaboration with about 19 local-led adaptation initiatives. We also joined the GCA in dedicating this study to Professor Salim Ul-Haq, who was a dear friend and mentor to many of us, and an absolute fearless warrior of climate justice and LLA. And I think for many of us, it's quite a sad time. Salim's son is here as well, and I was just telling Sheila how brave he is to be here. Saqib. So at this COP, nations will respond to the findings of the first assessments of the Paris Agreement's impacts, which is the global stocktake. And what it tells us is that there's a rapidly closing window of opportunity to secure a livable and sustainable future for all. Now, if that doesn't scare any of you, then I'm not sure what is going to. But the GCA and CDKN study can be seen as our own local stocktake of our own in partnership with local actors, and it's based on findings from more than 200 stories. And the team did an amazing job in pulling that off in a really short time. What these stories show is that communities in the global south are at the cutting edge of resilience and adaptation actions. But they are also not victims, and they are seriously agents of change. However, there was a call, particularly from local leaders, around not being able to access the resources and support that they very much need to truly embed their local-led adaptation actions. So examples of this will be, for example, once there's a cassava processing plant going, there's no power. Or once land has been cleared, there isn't the seed to plant. At the heart of all these stories is the championing of people's rights, and that came through very strongly. The story shows that local communities regard progress as rights, and I think we need to start looking at that in more detail than we used to in the past. There's also, and I don't know how you put this nicely, but that where fundamental rights are eroded, people's adaptive capacities are compromised. And if you reflect on that, I think it almost starts to make sense when you look at the deep inequalities and how that is just growing wider and wider. And then on the other hand, we're trying to implement climate actions, etc. But until those fundamental inequalities or injustices are addressed, I think anything on top of that just seems to be futile. So now back to the publication. The publication presents testimonies on how external drivers of environmental degradation magnify the climate impacts and deeply, deeply undermine the ability to cope. Communities are becoming stronger defenders of the environment, where they acting in a way that halts degradation, and that is actually then on the pathway that leads to resilience. And these are the things that communities need to be celebrated for. And often it gets ignored because communities are seen as victims and not the strong agents of change. In closing, I think it's an imperative that global leaders, and actually most leaders, recognize human rights as central to adaptation strategies, and that how we approach adaptation should be grounded in justice, equity, and integrity, and that we should not be afraid to talk about climate injustices, because I think until we shine the light on that, we won't have climate justice. So thank you. And who am I handing back to? Oh, Anju.
Good evening, everyone. Like Shehnaz, I'd like to start by dedicating the book, the session, to Salim, because when we started working on this a short year ago, as usual, I just shot off a message to Salim saying, we're doing this, we need you on the advisory committee. Within seconds, I had his reply, yes, what do you need me to do? Because he was just that kind of guy, and he's been sort of guiding us through this book, the Global Hub on Locally Led Adaptation with the GCA set up. Got, the reason it exists, it's the way it works. It has a lot to do with Salim and the advice that he gave. So I'm just going to give you a bit of the background on the report and then briefly to what it says. But we have here Myri, who brought the stories together. We have some of the people whose stories these are present here as well, and you'll hear from them. But if you could get the presentation going, please. Let me start by telling you about the Global Hub on Locally Led Adaptation. So as some of you will know, there was a Global Commission on Adaptation, and we have one of the commissioners sitting right here, who I think had a lot to do with the fact that one of the key messages from that commission was this basic understanding that all of us have had for such a long time, that unless you have effective action on the ground that is led by people and by communities, you can't be effective, whether that is sustainable development or that is adaptation. Also, the fact that, as people like Sheila know, we've been working on these issues for a very long time. We've been trying to get this message through for a very long time, that at the end of the day, it's local action that matters, it's local adaptation that matters. But it just seems like such an uphill task, even to this day, that sometimes it feels like we're reinventing the wheel. We have to relearn how to do this. But the fact is that the good experiences, the modeling, the piloting that needed to be done, it has been done already. The question is now, how do you take these good practices and examples and make them mainstream? Because that's not the case right now. So when we were thinking about the Global Hub on Locally Led Adaptation, if you could move on, please, we were trying to see where is it that we can bring change, right? Because there are many people working on adaptation. There are many people working on locally led adaptation. What's the value add that we could bring? And we felt that one of those was linking those good practices and examples to sources of funding, so channels of funding. And in the GCA, one of our main modalities of working under the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program is to link, to basically strengthen the adaptation elements of IFI projects, International Financial Institution projects. And when it came to LLA, I think it was a really good fit, because one of the things that the IFIs don't necessarily do well is bring on those community voices, or have the projects that they do address community voices. So the model that we've come up with is that we find these good examples, and you see there a guide that we produced on the work that was done in Mukuru, that was informed by a lot of the work that was done by Sheila in Mumbai, traveled, I think, all across Africa, Sheila ji. And then it really took off in Kenya. So this was a process of locally led planning for upgrading of urban informal settlements. And the work that was done in Kenya was jaw-dropping. There are people who worked for this in this area for years, and when they hear this story, they can't believe that it's 400,000. Nihar is here, and it was, Nihar, correct me if I'm wrong, but it literally was the learning that was collected all along the way from Mumbai, went to South Africa, went to Zimbabwe, I think, but it took off in Kenya. And you may ask, why did it take off in Kenya? Because the ground was fertile for this kind of thing. They had just passed this new constitution, which put in place systems of devolution. So it was literally because the government at the local level took this as their project, led where they needed to lead, but let the communities take the lead where the communities had to take the lead. So for us, this became our model and our standard. And the first thing we did was to bring out that guide. And now that guide is helping us do similar things in other countries around the world where IFIs have projects. So basically, just to give you a quick example, in Liberia, they were planning an urban resilience project in Monrovia. And we said to them, 70% of the population in Monrovia lives in urban informal settlements. How are you going to engage with them? Well, they had a plan, but we said, well, that's not good enough. So what we'll do for you is that we'll bring the people from Mukuru, we'll bring SDI and others who have experience in actually doing this and learning, to work with the communities and NGOs in Monrovia to do a similar process. They will come up with a plan, they will list their priorities, let that be your guide on what your investments need to be. So that's pretty much what we're doing with the Global Hub. So, for the Global Hub, for us, it's literally that. What we're doing is that we're just sort of reaching out to people and saying, tell us your stories, because your stories are going to inform and inspire action elsewhere. We hope to be the facilitators of that, so bring you together to say, here's a really good process that might work in your context. You have to make it your own. So it's not really about scaling up, really, also, but it's about making it your own, in your own context, fitting it in. Next, please. So we started the Stories of Resilience, which is a publication last year with that very purpose, that now we need to get these stories, we need to digest these stories, we need to learn from these stories, and then see how they can inform action elsewhere. So last year we started with Salim, with ICAD, because there was Gobishon at the conference, right? And to us, that was such a rich resource where you had people from around the world telling their LLA stories. So we said to Salim, okay, let's capture the best ones there, and that's what we did. This year, we decided to take a slightly different approach, which is we put out a call for stories. We said, okay, tell us your stories, local leadership, we want to hear from you. We got a tremendous response, well over 200 stories. And then, of course, Myri, the team at CDKN, had the enviable or unenviable task of going through that. And it was so rich that, initially we thought we'd just choose 10 stories and tell the 10 stories. But it was such a rich resource that Myri said, the only way we can do justice to this is to go thematically and try to see where the patterns are and bring it all together. And that's what we've tried to do in the stories that you have there. Next, please. So very quickly, we don't have the time really, but I'm going to quickly tell you what are the key things that are emerging. Well, the first thing is there's a global stock take going on. What it's told us, not surprising, we all knew it was coming, that basically we're not being effective at all with adaptation, right? So the money's not getting to where it is. It's not being delivered the way it should be. And so we need transformational adaptation. Love that word, transformational adaptation. And that needs to be informed and driven by local contexts, populations, and priorities. And then they also quote the IPCC, which says the way you deliver transformational adaptation is through enabling environments, we know, social learning, alignment of government and non-government objectives, bottom-up governance, phased long-term program support, and appropriate financing. We know all of this, but how are we delivering on any of this? Next, please. So, clearly, we're doing something wrong. Global systems, it's just business as usual. We have moved into the realm of climate finance, treating it very much like the realm of ODA and of development aid. And that is a problem. I think that's a fundamental issue, that we can't apply the rules that we applied to ODA. We can't apply the processes that we applied to ODA in the context of adaptation. Then that's where a fundamental paradigm shift needs to take place. Because currently, these systems that exist, they are not being designed for communities to be able to access the funding quickly. That's not the priority here. Invariably, the priority ends up being, how do we ensure whatever the global or national systems need, whether that's fiduciary standards or all of that. So that's pretty much what's just defining the way in which these systems have been defined. And it really does need an overhaul. It needs a complete rethink of how we're getting money to where it's needed. So the way the issue of climate rationale, actually, which is based on the work that was done by Avina Foundation, which is to say that right now we're asking communities to learn how to frame their problems in a way that can be heard by the global audience. But we need to turn that around. We need the global systems to deliver the finance in a way that communities understand adaptation. Because it's not as simple as just having a climate rationale. It's not as simple as just being able to cook up some kind of way of sort of rationalizing that this is a problem that relates to climate change. It's far more complex when you get to the ground. Next, please. Because all of these issues are embedded, as Shehnaz said, human rights are fundamental to this. So you can't sort of say that's not an adaptation issue, that can't be funded by climate finance. I mean, all of this just leads down a silly path, which we all seem to sort of accept in all seriousness sometimes. It's just, so the local leaders, they are working with multiple stakeholders to secure and scale their work. So they're really understanding that this is not an issue that they can deal with on their own. We had this in last year's report, we have it in this year's report, which is that they're reaching out, there are solidarity movements, there are partnerships that are taking place which are unusual, and the people are reaching out for help and support and strengthening their initiatives. They are proving by doing. This was particularly came out to us in the gender aspect, because invariably there are women who bear the brunt of a lot of these issues, don't often have support from the male counterparts culturally or for whatever reason, go off and do it anyway, and then the men sort of realize, oh, they're earning, they're making a living. And so they literally sort of, it's a proving by doing process for them as well that's going on. And also what we found is that, I mean, communities, they have to get on with this. They're not going to be able to wait for support to come for them from outside. So a lot of the work that they're doing, it's not compensated. They're just doing it because they have to. So that's also something that we need to recognize, that there's a lot of adaptation going out on the ground that's not adequately compensated. Next, please. Yeah, very quickly. So I'll leave you to go through this. Shehnaz already said it. Big focus on nature, not surprising again, because, and in ways that we're sort of rediscovering and being led by these communities on how to be more sustainable in our dealings with nature. They're being innovating in filling institutional gaps, working with schools, with museum, any organization that exists locally to fill in those gaps that exist. Conflict between generations rather than collaboration rather than conflict. And finally, the whole of person and whole of society approaches. So some of the things we talk about, for instance, is the mental health impacts of climate change, which we've not really been talking about. But these are about people. And the losses that they face, it takes an incredible toll on them. And that's something that we need to account for as well. So I'll cut it there, but lots of interesting stories. So please read them at your leisure. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it would be Dr. Shehnaz who would be like doing the official launch of the report. Sorry, Constance. I think it's your turn to give your experience on the report.
What am I to say?
Sit or standing, don't worry.
Thank you very much. Once again, I'm here. By the name is Constance Okolait. I come from Tororo, Uganda, the eastern part of Uganda. and near the border of Kenya and Uganda. Actually, we are one of the members who had the story to write. So our story about the local led adaptation is something that the women at local level are doing something, and they are doing something better. They are doing something very nice. In the past, the culture used not to allow these women, not even to talk, not even to move near where meetings take place, not even where a man is seated. So, but now we have changed that culture about the women also can have a decision in a family. The women can now sit and discuss, do the budgeting, do what. There is less domestic violence, less gender equality. So you find things are now on round table. But our problem, we can expand that. But how can we expand it? We cannot continue because we don't have funds. We have it locally within us, and from there they also pick and take to others. Now, why are we doing this? We want to do this because climate change has come. It is destroying the people. It is destroying the communities. People don't even know about climate change, but it is there and it has come. And how can we talk about it? How can it be changed to the positive? By having those groups, they sit, they discuss, identify their problems. After identification, you find that they get the answer by themselves. But the only problem is they don't have funds to push it further beyond where they would wish to move. If they had funds that they would push them ahead, maybe we have trees, we have less, not much. Can we have more trees? Yes, they give them trees, they plant. They give them more knowledge, they have. They give the indigenous knowledge plus the science, they mix, they teach, and they come out of there. Look at the food security. Look at so many issues. Look at that tomorrow. This, for me, I am today. How about tomorrow? Who will take it up? Let those ones take it up. And with time, I think we have every story here, in here, and all will be shared. As simple as that, I don't have much to say because of time. This is the book. We have the story in. We say thank you very much for the people who managed to bring it. It is a good book, and we need everybody to read it, and the answers are here from the community, completely from the community. Thank you very much.